Hello, students. All right, so let's look back at our note sheet. So we should have filled in this top part. You watched the movie on the Atlantic slave trade. You filled in this part. You watched the movie on the forgotten slavery of our ancestors and Native American slavery. Filled in this part. You watched the triangle trade definition. You talked about the resources that America had and the resources that Africa had and the resources that Europe had. Then you watched this video on Jamestown, life and labor in the Chesapeake. I wanted to point out that a lot of things that they're talking about that are happening in the Chesapeake also apply to the middle colonies. So that headright system, hiring indentured servants to work the land for you, that also happened in the middle colonies. The only difference is in the middle colonies, they're going to be growing grains. And in Virginia, they're going to be growing tobacco. So I just wanted to bring up a couple other big ideas before we look at the assignment. So the first one of those ideas is that slavery has existed in most human societies forever. Europeans enslaved each other and enslaved other people. Native Americans enslaved each other and enslaved other people. Africans enslaved each other and enslaved other people. But usually it was like something that happened after warfare. So you would fight, and then any people you took, if you won, then you took those people captive and they became slaves. Or it was a form of like there was a rich, wealthy lord and they had servants below them, or in Europe, we call them serfs who were sort of tied to the land and they couldn't leave the land unless they had special permits and things like that. And that's what happened in Europe. What is so tragic about the Atlantic slave trade is that it happens at a time when Europe, by and large, has kind of been like, maybe this whole slavery thing is a bad idea and we shouldn't do it anymore. And so a lot of places in Europe, they had stopped enslaving other Europeans. And so it's like we had this moment where it's like, things are going to get better for people and like the world's going to become a better place. And it's like, nope, just kidding. It just got a whole bunch worse because of the Atlantic slave trade. So the planters in the middle colonies and the southern colonies, and even the farmers in New England, first tried enslaving Native Americans. That didn't work as well because Native Americans would often die of diseases, and because the Native Americans were familiar with the land. So they would escape and be able to kind of escape into their homeland and be safe there. So what happened is a lot of Native Americans eventually actually end up getting shipped to the West Indies because those they couldn't escape from there. The kind of slavery that happens with Native Americans is very similar to what had been going on in the Americas beforehand, but bigger. So the Europeans and their Native American allies, remember we talked about the Pequot War, where they fought and they captured the Pequots and then shipped them off to the West Indies. Well, that kind of fighting and then capturing people, turning them into slaves was something that happened very frequently. It was just the escalation of it. Instead of keeping the Pequots there, and then maybe in a few years the Pequots would have earned their freedom or they would have eventually gone back to their lands, they got shipped away. And so it's this new level of brutality that the Europeans are bringing to slavery, which is ironic, again, because at the time Europeans had kind of been like, oh, maybe slavery is a bad thing. And then when they engage in slavery in North America and in Africa, it's like even worse than it was before. And it all comes back to this basic idea that Europeans have at this time that like my making money is more important than your life. And it's funny because when I say that out loud, a lot of you are gonna be like, oh my gosh, that's a horrible thing to think. And yet, even in our lives today, we'll still see this sort of thing happening. And we'll talk more about this later, but in our world today, it's very common for people to make a lot of money and pay their workers very little, especially when we're talking about clothing and electronics that we get. We here in the United States get clothing and electronics cheap because in other places in the world, those workers are working for very, very little. And it's that same sort of idea that existed back then that allowed slavery to happen. And it's going to take a long time for Americans to sort of shake off this idea and become better people and people who think more about each other and about the world as a whole than just themselves. And it's a fight that we're still engaged in today, right? This idea that I need to think about how my actions affect other people and not just how I want to get what I want. So your last part of this assignment, this is the part that you're going to turn in, looks like this. What I would like you to do is I would like you to fill out this graphic organizer. It's going to require you to think a little bit deeper. So I gave you a bunch of information. You're going to need to pull out of that information some big ideas. Okay. So if you want to work with somebody, that would be a great idea. Talk to your parents. This is going to require a little bit of thought. Okay. So I want you to think about economic things that led to slavery. I want you to think about ideas or beliefs. Sorry, guys. Tested for COVID, not positive, but I still have this nasty cough. And then I want you to think about key historical events or precedents. So this is stuff that's happening that's going to help slavery happen. Okay. So I would like you to fill out 2 boxes for each of these. I've left you a third, so if you can think of another one, that's great. And then in 3 to 5 sentences, I want you to explain, why did slavery happen? So it's this huge event, right? 10 million people. That's more people than live on the entire Wasatch Front. So everything from Bountiful down to Provo. 10 million people were stolen from Africa and shipped to the Americas. Why did that happen? And I want you to explain it in 3 to 5 minutes. Good luck.